Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Kumar, co-director of Solstina, and welcome to our 56th happy hour. We will be in Zoom for the majority of the event tonight, with the exception of one video, which we will also stream in YouTube live. And we do that because the video and audio resolution is higher. And we'll have instructions on how to join YouTube live in the chat, or you can always just stay in Zoom and enjoy the video. Please type any questions you might have for our guest artist in the chat. We'll choose the ones that we think will have the widest interest. And if the chat isn't your thing, we've made it as easy as possible for you to ignore it. We'll pay some ground rules for the chat. Mainly, please be kind. Don't use the chat to complain about the chat or to complain about the sound. Zoom has its pros and cons, and after 55 events, we're well aware of its sonic limitations. That's it. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Maya.
Nicely done, KK. I'm Maya Jasper White, Kevin's co-director of Celestina, and I'm so happy and honored to introduce you guys to an amazing violinist, musician, and human being. So as usual, you could easily go on Google and look Vijay up. So my introduction to him is going to be something of a, because you want to make sure you get everything right, because there's a lot to share about this person, peppered with some more personal anecdotes. So here goes. Vijay is a passionate advocate for the vital role of music to heal, shape, and change the way we see ourselves and the world around us. So personal aside number one, this is not kumbaya. What you're going to be hearing about is so sincere, so sophisticated intellectually, and really deeply personal and spiritually felt. Hailed by the New Yorker as a visionary violinist, one of the most radical thinkers in the unradical world of American classical music. I don't really need to qualify that. That sort of says it all. Vijay is the founding artistic director of Street Symphony, which you may be familiar with conceptually from the movie. What was the name of that movie?
The Soloist.
Thank you. The Soloist. Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, exactly. If you haven't, you should see it. It was good. It's a community of musicians fostering connection for people in recovery from homelessness and incarceration in LA. Vijay enjoys a protean career as a collaborator and communicator, sharing his work with communities, companies, and campuses across America, including recently the plenary address for Americans for the Arts. Vijay has collaborated with artists like the Kronos Quartet, Yo-Yo Ma, the Philharmonia Orchestra of London, and served as a member of the first violin section of the LA Phil for 12 years. He's the recipient of a 2018 MacArthur Fellowship. So my sort of personal aside number two would be that from many hours and many years of knowing Vijay and watching his career evolve, something that really strikes me about the way his humanity has responded to all of his different life experiences is that he's had a very front row seat to a very wide range of ways in which music touches people. So in the span of one day, he might go from going to a donor's house in Beverly Hills to playing for homeless people on Skid Row, and then be faced with the Herculean task of basically making sense of all that over and over and over. So I think that's what I think of when I think of Vijay, as someone who's really put himself in these positions of having to make sense of like the totality of our art and where it fits into the world that we're in now. So yeah, that said, we're going to stay in Zoom tonight. Like Kevin said about the audio quality, we're aware of what it is. No YouTube Live, just Zoom. Vijay has plenty of albums out that you can look up, and we'll have links to those in our playlist. But for now, Vijay, can you say hello and tell us what you're going to play?
Oh my goodness. Hi, everyone. Maya, that was the kindest, most thoughtful, intentional, wonderful introduction. Thank you. Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. It's just so great to see 212 people who have called in or who are here, and to be part of this amazing community of Celestina. I mean, likewise, I have seen Celestina flourish and grow and blossom. I mean, I think Celestina and Street Symphony started at similar times. And so I remember seeing the very first photos of Celestina and seeing, I remember distinctly the ice cream social, because I really was very, very enthusiastic.
Food is very important to us.
Very enthusiastic about the ice cream socials back in 2012 or 2013. And so it just feels like we've been in each other's circles and in each other's corners for several years. And yeah, nothing but mutual love and admiration here. So I feel so honored to be with you all. I'm going to dive into a little bit of music, but to preface this music, I'd like to speak a poem upon which it's based. And this is a poem attributed to the Sufi, the 14th century Sufi mystic and poet Hafiz. And Hafiz in Arabic is actually a ceremonial term. His name is much longer. It was Khwaja Shams ud-Din Muhammad Hafiz Shirazi. Now, Shiraz, for anyone who drinks wine, is the city of Shiraz, or Sirah, comes from. And Hafiz was a prolific poet and writer. And I found this poem in this book that is right behind me here, called The Gift. And I found this poem actually at a moment of intense grief. And I think actually it was more like the poem found me, because that's what great poems do. They find you and they work their way through the cracks in your heart, and they plant a seed. And the seed that got planted took the form of a screenshot of that poem that I immediately sent to Rina Esmail. I think even before I had bought the book. I did buy the book, I promise, eventually. But the poem is this. When the violin can forgive the past, it starts singing. When the violin can stop worrying about the future, you will become such a drunk, laughing nuisance that God will then lean down and start combing you into her hair. When the violin can forgive every wound caused by others, the heart starts singing.
Gorgeous. Vijay, first thing is, when does the album come out?
So the official release date of the album, which is entitled When the Violin, is actually June 1. June 1st is when the album will be available. Yeah, it's entitled When the Violin. It's going to be based on this, and we'll talk through that as we go on and kind of dive into it.
Yeah. You mentioned the Hafiz poems. So would you say the theme of the whole album is based on the idea of forgiveness?
You know, I feel like what moves me around this idea of forgiveness is the fact that forgiveness actually requires us to lean in to what hurts and actually like embrace the fullness. Say it's the fullness of a wound or a betrayal or a hurt caused by someone else. And forgiveness requires a choice. There's a specific act of choosing, a decision to not take the entirety of our identity from the pain, to not live the rest of our lives reacting to this thing. It might have been the worst thing that ever happened to us. It might have been the worst thing we ever did to another person. Mm-hmm. And so the expression of this poem and the expression of this piece, When the Violin, which, you know, of course, is written by Rina. It was first a work written for choir and cello. And when she wrote When the Violin for the cello, I went, what the, and asked her to write a different version for me. And actually, the solo violin version was something that I played as part of my address to Americans for the Arts last June. So Rina arranged it for solo violin. But I've really been thinking about this idea of self-forgiveness and choosing to take a new narrative from which we live our lives as a kind of fundamental act of self-authorship. It's a way that we can live into the world in a time where it seems like every single time we open the phone or open the news, something is there that shatters us. Something is there that just breaks us open. Mm-hmm. So how do we move on when there's so much hurt and so much pain in the world? And so this album is kind of, you know, it's a meditation on forgiveness, but it's also a conversation around isolation, loneliness, trying to find some humor in this time as well, but ultimately choosing a new story, choosing to live our lives out from something more than the pain.
Can you talk a little bit about the timing of this album? I mean, is this an idea that you've had for a long time, or is this or an idea that has come up, you know, during the pandemic? And how quickly did it go from concept to completion? You
know, it's really interesting, Kevin, because of course the sort of centerpiece, if there is one, a centerpiece of the album is the unaccompanied sonata in G minor by Bach. And I think every string player who gets to play Bach, you know, kind of dove into playing perhaps as much Bach as possible during the quarantine. And you know, frankly, recording, especially solo violin recording, has always absolutely terrified me. It is hands down the scariest thing. I'm so happy to see Yoshi nodding right now, because it's just you and the microphone. You become a membrane. The performer becomes a membrane. This kind of like withering, translucent, you know, shaking reed in the wind, you know, between what you interpret as the composer's intention and what you hope to translate into the microphone. Right. And so I sort of wanted to confront this fear. And so last year on Instagram, I said, okay, I'm going to relearn, rememorize all 6 sonatas and partitas and post 1 minute every day to Instagram. And actually, I feel very lucky that Celestina and I share a social media coordinator in the amazing Audrey Knight-Lippert. And so, you know, Audrey kind of both helped me and helped kick my butt to make sure that the posts were up there. You know, we held each other accountable, or I think she held me more accountable. But, you know, the truth is that the idea to make an album was never something that I had set out to do. And also, I didn't want it to be like a one and done thing of like, okay, here's all the Bach. I wanted to dance with the bones of Bach. I wanted to hear something new in Bach. I wanted to bring Bach back in conversation with my lived experience. You know, for us, for classically trained string players, Bach is both our Everest and our Bible. It's our most deeply challenging, endeavor, and it's also something that can bring us comfort in a time of grief. And to kind of talk about these sonatas a little bit, you know, they were specifically in the title page of the six sonatas and partitas. Bach chose to write the year 1720. And this is actually something that he did not normally do, because composers during that time were constantly recycling their music. So to ascribe a year to a piece meant it was very significant. And the most significant thing that happened in 1720 to Johann Sebastian Bach is that his wife died very suddenly. And she was the love of his life. They were together as kids. They were caught in the organ loft in Eisenach when they were 17. I mean, this
Naughty
was,
Bach,
well, of course, not to mention 20 something kids. But, you know, he was shattered. He was completely shattered. And so then he sat down and he titles these pieces Sei Solo, which can mean six solos, but can also mean you are alone. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of this meditation on aloneness during this year of COVID, during this year of grief, felt like choosing a new story, as I think Bach always did. Bach was no stranger to grief, but he always reinvented himself. He always chose a new story. So I wanted to recontextualize the work of Bach, and that kind of opens up, you know, the conversation to the next piece, which is a work by the Finnish composer and conductor and my former boss, Esa-Pekka Salonen, called Lachen Verlernt. And I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit, or should we play it, or
well,
how do you want to,
No, before we get to that, we wanted to ask you, Maya, you can jump in if you want here. We wanted to ask you about your,
oh, that's right.
Not a relationship with, you know, Bach's bones, but with somebody more alive.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about what it's like being so musically collaborative with your spouse, you know, and what that was like a year or two ago, 5 years ago, and now.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question, Maya. And I have to say, you know, to hear Interglow played so beautifully and sung so beautifully by all of you in the beginning of this time together is such a treat, because I still have the sound of the MIDI file in my ear from when Rina composes stuff. So I hear this, I either hear her singing it into her phone, or I hear the twangy, awful MIDI version. So the first time I heard Celestina play the real thing, I was like, oh my God, okay, great. Like that's what it should sound like. And that's what it should have been like the whole time. So of course, Rina and I have been collaborating with each other for several years. We first met actually, strangely, in India in 2011 at a conference that neither of us thought we were going to be at. And then we started collaborating together when Rina created a piece of music called Take What You Need for a community choir based in Skid Row that was working alongside Street Symphony. And so for several years, Rina has had this sort of prescient tendency of showing me parts of myself that I didn't know were there, or showing me parts of an experience or an encounter that, you know, the moment that I saw them through her lens were just irrefutable. And so, you know, then when that sort of emerged from the Street Symphony context to, you know, me asking her to write more music for unaccompanied violin, it became a conduit. She became the bridge to me understanding my other own musical lineage, which is of course Hindustani music. I grew up listening to Hindustani music. My parents sang, you know, they would sing Bengali folk songs at home, and you know, I would drive to my lessons and they would be playing Bize Carmen on one way to the lesson, on the other way they'd be playing Bengali folk songs. So I always wanted to live this music, but it was not part of my lived experience, and it became real through Rina. And so this is sort of how our collaboration blossomed. And, you know, she just now has a daily habit of showing me parts of myself that I don't see. So I guess that's just a great way to live a life and have a relationship.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about the Salonen piece before you play it?
Of course. Yeah. So this is a work called Lachen verlernt. It's a piece. So Lachen verlernt means laughter unlearned. And this is a quote from a movement by a piece by Arnold Schoenberg called Pierrot Lunaire. And Pierrot Lunaire is a clown. And this is a piece for small ensemble and vocalist. And the vocalist is not really singing, not really speaking. She's doing something called Sprechstimme, which is half singing, half speaking. And so in this movement, I think it's the ninth movement, it's called Prayer to Pierrot. And this narrator is literally begging the clown Pierrot, who is, in quotations called the horse doctor of the soul, to teach her how to laugh again. And in Esa-Pekka's program notes, he says that this idea of the clown, this voiceless clown being an image of reverence is kind of a beautiful metaphor for the performer, that the performer on stage somehow reveals more to an audience than perhaps they really want to see. And so maybe that'll be where I pause for now.
Vijay, you know, as I was watching that, it just occurred to me that I have um, kind of, I think I've been aware of your playing since the time that you first came to LA. Like I think we met playing chamber music at, someone's house, right?
That's right. That's right.
And sort of like sporadically throughout the years we've just read together. And a lot of violinists, um, I feel like for violinists it's really easy for us to rest on our laurels.
Mm.
Like the things that we do well, we will kind of just rely on those things, no matter what it is that we're interpreting or um, whatever kind of opportunities come up for performance or artistic opportunities. It's like there's something that kind of just defines us, and we just go with that. You know, I mean, it's hard enough to play the violin, right? That it's just kind of like, here's what we do. This is us. But I've noticed that you have really, your playing has really evolved.
Mm.
And it seems like a very intentional thing, evolved in a beautiful way.
Mm.
And it seems like you've actually put thought into it. And just as right before the event started, I was talking about how you have this liquid and fluid quality to your playing, and if that was just something that was just there innately, or if that's something that you developed. And it definitely seems much more like it was there, but it's maybe brought out more now. It seems to be more of a focus of your playing, and I just wanted you to give your thoughts on that.
Well, that's very, very kind of you to say, Kevin. And it actually, I think for us as violinists, for any musician, but the truth is, this is something that extends to all of us, is that so often we live in somebody else's narrative, right? So often we play the way that is comfortable for someone else's narrative, right? And I think as someone who spent a long time loving playing orchestral music, I always felt so free when I could play chamber music, because I was able to hear myself. I was able to hear my voice. I was able to hear my voice in relation to others. And you are your whole self. In fact, you're expected to bring your most authentic self and your most authentic sound to the relationships around you. And that's how you contribute. You don't contribute by hiding. You don't contribute by sort of self-effacing. That's different than blending, of course. It's different than playing an ensemble. And part of it is as well, so often we think about, we can even say, I'm going to go work on my Bach, right? As if Bach is going to change, right? It's not Bach that's going to change. We also say, I'm going to go work on my violin playing. The violin's there. The violin's not changing. Sure, you can do certain physical things. The thing that changes is you. And so I've been thinking about the fact is the true instrument is us. We're the instrument, right? We're the thing that is the actual raw material that is being constantly honed and crafted and sculpted like, I don't know, a piece of marble or a sponge. It's some days we don't know what we're made of. And it's only from that sort of, finding that sort of sense of self-regard that's really interesting. And so, part of what's so curious to me about this project is that I wanted to also find a way that was not sort of anybody else's right way but mine, if that makes sense. And so that involved a lot of experimentation. It involved a lot of failure, and it involved a lot of self-forgiveness. And part of it is like, you listen to yourself talk, or you hear a recording of your voice and you go, ooh, is that me? Oh, that's so cringy, right? And it's the sort of thing we feel the same way as musicians about our own voice that comes through our instrument.
Sure.
And so it's a constant act of self-forgiveness and self-negotiation of, okay, what do I love? And so for me, I wanted to incorporate my new understanding of Hindustani musical styles in the beautiful fluidity that so many great Hindustani vocalists or instrumentalists accomplish from this kind of like miasma between their left hand articulation and their right hand enunciation. If you watch a great sarangi player, that's one of the bowed instruments, you don't know which hand is articulating and which hand is singing. Both hands are doing both things, right? Yeah. And so it's a much more nuanced technique that serves the intention of the expression. So I think I really wanted to make myself, again, transparent and malleable to the expression that the composer was looking for. And that's actually why I've been choosing to play more often now with a Baroque bow. And I know we wanted to can we dive into this part of the conversation?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So this is a Baroque bow. This is a replica of a bow that is used to play, let's say, 18th century Italian music. It's quite a long bow. Sometimes Baroque bows are a little bit shorter. You'll notice people who play early music holding them higher. Just for comparison, I have my modern bow here, and you'll see the biggest difference is sort of at the tip. The tip is shaped differently. So the Baroque bow's shape is kind of like this, and the modern bow's shape is like this. And so the music that was being played, or the expression that was sort of happening around the time of the modern bow's invention, was much more sort of melodic, longer phrases, that sort of thing in music. But, all of Bach's music was the sort of shorter phrases. But I chose to play the Salonen on a Baroque bow. And it's because I was thinking about the narration. I was thinking about the Sprechstimme, and that there was also something harder. It wasn't like I was conquering the instrument. I was going to lose, right? And that was the thing. Like I wanted to be in this place of fragility, this place of almost feeling like I was fighting and stretching and pleading with the implement itself so that something in the expression would sound that way. So I don't know if that's like too meta, but that's the sort of way that I was thinking. And to make these parameters and these roadblocks for myself actually give me a sense of structure.
And you chose to use gut strings too, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm playing on a modern violin made by Eric Benning, who's a wonderful violin.
Yeah. Can you speak about that? I mean, I'm guessing you could probably get an instrument from a collection, or some sort of an old Italian instrument or something like that. Why did you choose to play an instrument by a local maker?
So the truth is, I was actually really inspired by one of my dear friends who's actually on this call, Mitch Newman, who was my co-troublemaker for many years in the orchestra. And Mitch introduced me to Eric's shop. I would take the old Italian instrument that I was very generously loaned by the LA Phil into that shop, and I knew Eric for years. And there was one time I was going on a trip. I didn't want to take the old orchestra instrument, and I asked Eric. I think I was going to like Canada in February, and it was going to be -26. So I was like, give me one of your violins because I don't want to take this instrument. So he gave me one of his violins, and I didn't want to stop playing it. There was something about, there's something about playing an old instrument where you as the player erase yourself. You have to learn how the instrument wants to be played. Whereas with a new instrument, you can put your sound into it. You're sculpting it. And so, I saw how delighted Mitch was with his instrument. I just decided that I would go for it. And this is my primary instrument. But yeah, I do have gut strings on this instrument, which is, again, a tenet of early music playing. And Eric has taken down a lot of the tension on this instrument so that I find that the instrument just rings a lot more.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to just take a brief moment away from our conversation to make our Celestina's donation appeal. This is, like we said, this is our 56th happy hour. These events are free to attend, but not to produce. And so, we would really appreciate if you are able to right now, and you like what you are watching and hearing, we would appreciate a donation. We'll put in the chat ways of donating, and we are in serious preparation right now for our upcoming season, finding venues, artistic planning. We also play concerts for patients in the hospital who are there because of COVID. And your donations would be completely tax deductible. Thanks so much. Vijay, we had people in the chat wanting us to make sure that we mention your project, Breathe. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Of course. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Kevin. So last February in 2020, I was very lucky to present a program of Rina's chamber music alongside two really wonderful artists, a pianist named Susanna Bartal and a cellist who I'm sure is familiar to many of you, the wonderful Peter Myers. And so we played two of Rena's piano trios and a few works for solo instruments. And then we got married the next day. And then, so as to not freak out about any one of the events we were doing, we decided to record our entire program the next day just for posterity. We weren't even sure what we were going to do with it. And so we decided that we were going to re-release the contents of the album on Bandcamp, specifically to raise funds for an initiative run by students in one of the tech universities in India, basically the sort of like MIT version of India. Students who are organizing to deliver oxygen concentrators to New Delhi hospitals. And so we've now raised over $3,000, I think, in just a handful of days. To support this initiative. For the first week, Rena and I matched the funds. We've already sent a nice chunk over, but all the proceeds for the rest of this month will be contributed entirely to oxygen concentrators in the New Delhi hospitals. And we would love any support. And then you can listen to this gorgeous music as well. And Marissa is, she's just been kind enough to put the link in the chat. So would love your support. And it's for a good cause. And the reason why it's called Breathe is because one of the piano trios, one of the pieces on the album is a piece called Sans, which actually I believe Maya played the premiere of. And Sans in Hindi means breath and to breathe. So that's why it's called Breathe. We thought it was so fitting. The organization that we're donating to is actually called Breathe India. So many sort of confluences there. Thanks for asking, Kevin.
Awesome. Vijay, tell us a little bit more about your really long and involved history just with arts advocacy in general and with creating community around music.
You know, I'm so struck by the ways in which musicians and artists are able to have conversations from multiple angles at the same time. And I wonder if it's because when we're practicing, we're in, this sort of unapplauded space of, perhaps even trying a thing out and we're like, well, does that thing work? Okay, so let me try an entirely new thing. Does that thing work? And we're constantly experimenting. I actually feel like the practicing process is much more like a process that scientists undertake to, test out a hypothesis. Like, will I suck less if I play with this? Like that sort of thing. But I also wonder if that allows us to have multifaceted approaches to what we might consider intractable issues. Right now, intractable issues that are on our shoulders, of course, the myriad of social justice issues, but also issues related to public health, issues related to political division, the ways in which we choose to stay rooted in our indignant pain, and not find ways to create new stories for ourselves. And I'm always struck by something that Toni Morrison said. I think it was in her Nobel Prize lecture. She said, make up a story. Make up a story. Narrative is radical because it creates us as we create it. Narrative creates us as we create it. So I feel that artists have always had and will always continue to be called to vital, important roles in social discourse, because the bottom line is we are more powerful than we think. As artists and as citizens, our work is one. Our work is to make a daily practice of this world that we envision, a world that is more connected, more courageous, more whole. Whatever that means, we know how to practice it. So I feel that, Kevin, you're very kind to talk about, the evolution of my sound. I feel like artists practice evolution. That's our goal. And so we have always had these really critical roles to play in evolving any kind of discourse that we're involved in.
So what does that look like in the 21st century today with using social media? And tell us more. Let's get Audrey in here, our shared social media maven.
Hey, Audrey. Hey, Dossie. As Audrey is joining us, I just want to say, I've been so struck And Maya, I would love for you, if you're willing, to talk about how you all at Celestina have created community during this time, because you've done an incredible, remarkable job of finding ways for us in the comfort of our homes to still connect with each other, still have vital places of discourse and create belonging, right? So we can create belonging in this form. And I feel like what that requires is real intentionality on both sides, right? It requires intentionality to have an openness to perhaps have a new experience, hear a perspective you're not necessarily willing to hear, but then be able to step out into that vulnerable void and be able to say something that you kind of might not feel ready to say necessarily. And Audrey, I'm wondering how do you think about this, and for Celestina and for so many of the projects that you're involved in?
No, I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely beautiful. The way that music, just all music, connects people, gives, even whenever somebody's just listening and not playing, I feel like it kind of gives them a voice, just as a listener. And like a shared language. That's a really fun thing.
Yeah, that feels right on. And I feel like that's actually what was so intriguing about stepping into the social media space of like, I'm gonna try a thing. And today's thing absolutely was awful. I went through an hour of takes to do this 1 minute of music, and it sucked. And it was just like, Dasi, I see you nodding your head. But honestly, Dasi, I've actually been really inspired by your videos, because you'll just be like, look, today was a hard day, and it's not, sometimes we use social media to curate a life that we think everyone else wants to see. What if we were radically honest about our lives in social media? And Dasi, would you mind me putting you on the spot and just kind of sharing about that?
Well, I think vulnerability is the most beautiful thing in my life. Being able to express how you really feel, and knowing that people won't judge you for being honest and having like a fake presence, or having a real presence, and fake presences are a little bit harder to keep up with. And yeah, it's really interesting being out there on social media, and I haven't gotten any negative criticism so far. So I'm hoping that it continues that way, but I really enjoy being able to express myself fully.
Dasi and Audrey, would you mind sort of like explaining how and why you came into like the Celestina Vijay fold? Like maybe just give the listeners some context.
I came in through Dasi, of course. She has, introduced me to the world of classical music. Not music. I've always loved music, but classical music is a little different. And it was funny whenever she, I think was 7 or 8, she picked out a viola and she said, that's what I want to play. And I was like, please not that one, because it's the ones that you hold. And I really wanted her to play the cello because I think the cello sounds better, but
she's like,
but yeah, she wanted that one. And I was like, okay, fine. And then I'm along for the ride. That's really, I'm along for the ride. And then, helping out with Celestina and social media, it's really kind of for her and for her generation. I would like for this to be something that just continues to be a thing.
So I don't know if you even remember this, but what Audrey wrote in her cover letter, we didn't even have we weren't looking for a social media manager, but when I saw your resume and experience and what you said, I was like, maybe we should. What do you guys think? She said, because of what Dasi does, I have a vested interest in seeing this art form thrive. And I've never forgotten that. And that's just like the approach that you have towards your role, I think, for all of us. So not only does Audrey work with Celestina and Vijay, but also with Kevin and Amy Barston in Canandaigua. So like this has turned into like a, what's the right word? You're like the apostle for classical music.
What I love about this conversation is that it's kind of like, first of all, it's so wholesome, right? Compared to what is usually on social media. And also it's just reclaiming what the purpose of social media can be. It's like we're creating these little pockets of community, and I mean, Dossie, it's like hearing you talk about like you being like advocating almost for vulnerability, like just imagine like what kind of a difference that would make in, whoever would be open to that message, and Vijay, like, like putting um, your takes on there and showing like that, everybody's not perfect. And, just, I mean, this is all aside from just putting beauty out into the world, so I love this conversation.
And part of it too is to realize a hashtag is a community.
Right.
And one of the hashtags that Audrey and I collaborate on is a hashtag that we call creative sadhana. And sadhana is a Sanskrit word which means daily practice. You can have a yoga sadhana, you can have a running sadhana. My sadhana was to confront my fear of recording. And it was to put something creative, put something beautiful in people's feeds while the whole world and our institutions are falling apart. And so this idea of like, what is your, I mean, like you, the Celestina community, what is your creative sadhana? What do you apply yourself to, whether it's reading or cooking or living? That's how we, create our world.
Vijay, you asked like how we define community, and certainly like the COVID year has been really transformational in that sense. And I think like the biggest lesson for us, I mean, it's amazing how you put even a hashtag as a community. That is so true, because, when COVID locked everybody down, community wasn't any longer such a literal concept. You could have a community of ideas, a community of shared interests. And what is a hashtag if not kind of like code and a shorthand for all of those things? P.S. Don't follow my private Instagram account unless you like knitting.
That's your creative sadhana.
Exactly. Not so much violin videos on my Instagram, more knitting. But yeah, just like we've been saying too, that a Zoom room is as real as any other room.
Absolutely.
That like they're along those same lines, that technology sort of facilitates and has changed the definitions of what a community is and can be. And, when you keep complimenting us and Celestina, but like the reality is it's you guys who keep coming to all of these events that create the community that we have. And we're just so grateful to all of you for that. So
Vijay, we have some questions we want to get to from the audience, but before that, would you mind playing a little Bach?
I would love to play some Bach for you all.
Okay. And thank you, Audrey and Dossie.
Definitely.
Let's start with Keon's question. Keon, can you unmute yourself? It's $1 million question.
Thank you so much for all your wisdom tonight, Vijay, and not just the wisdom in your words, but the wisdom in your notes. I'm curious, how would you advise musicians and artists and composers like myself to get involved in activism in their community?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, Keon. And I think that part of the beginning of understanding activism is to understand that always activism is a two-way street, right? It's a relationship, right? So what I often think about is, can I go to Skid Row and be in front of a community of people who have experienced homelessness and say, I'm an activist for you, right? And so typically the thing is that it feels so uncomfortable to say it that way, right? Rather, the activism is in showing up to the relationship, right? It's in showing up to the series of conversations and unsolvable questions that are involved in being in situ, right? Being in a site, in a place. Now, of course, during COVID, that's so difficult to do, right? I mean, we haven't been able, we're only slowly starting to go back to Skid Row to do some of our in-person programs at Street Symphony, but continuously the question is, how do we lean into the brokenness that exists in our world, which often involves leaning into the brokenness within, right? So part of the other side of activism is this kind of self-nurturing, this self-activism, right? Because oftentimes we're called to do work in the world to address some part of ourselves that ache or hurt, right? And for us as artists, our artivism is our own sort of practice. And that's not my term. That's a term of the great son jarocho musician Marta Gonzalez, who's part of the Quetzals. And, she and I have talked a lot about how, to address the ache in the world, you have to address the ache inside. And so that's what I would say is to lean in, to listen to your own creative impulses. That is as much the activism we need today as making sure we post the right hashtag. Perhaps we need the latter more than we need the former. Or rather, the other way around. We need the former. We need the former. We need you to make stuff. Make stuff. Make stuff.
Thanks, Keon. Jane Brucker, you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
I was just sailing away on that. What a evening. I was just wondering if there's particular pieces that you would go to when you're feeling the weight of darkness, something that brings you certain pieces, or is it just, it's always changing, it depends, or is there, I found two pieces that, over the last year, I've stayed for a year, I'll just keep going to listen to them. I don't play. I branch out, but there's two I know will bring me light.
Would you mind sharing them, Jane? I'm curious.
Beethoven's fourth and fifth piano concertos.
Yeah. Those are some serious #desert island pieces, right? If you were to only listen to those, and the slow movement of Emperor, right? How could you not? The fifth concerto. How could you not listen to that? Yeah, Meredith, of course. The fourth movement of the second movement of the fourth concerto too.
And they don't deny the dark side to me.
Well, I think I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jane, because, so much of what this music allows us to do, I was just right before this session, I was watching an interview of the great musician Jacob Collier on Channel 4.
Oh God, yes. Sorry.
In the UK. No, yeah, I mean, exactly. And oh God, yes is right, because he was talking about this sort of emotional intelligence of music, the emotional nuance of music, right?
Yep.
It's not an either or. Music is not either or. In fact, music serves, even when we look at the sort of nerdy neurology of music, to constantly violate our expectations of what's going to happen, right? I mean, even in so much of the Bach, gives us a movement, we think it's going to end a certain way, and then he gives us a dissonance, and there's a whole something that comes after it, right? And so it's this sort of ache. So for me personally, of course, I find that for me, Bach is both like my mirror, where I look into the mirror and I'm like, oh, right, I'm feeling that, because that feeling resonates. Because sometimes I don't even know what I'm feeling. Right. And so it's this thing of, is it not only that music takes me out of my darkness? No, music allows me to realize, oh, wow, I messed up today. Today is not a good day. I should not have you on Zoom all day long today. Too bad, But it's also this thing to say that all, I'm seeing Amira's answer here in the chat too. It's like all the creative arts allow us to have some aspect of metabolism, right? Self-metabolism, to sit with what hurts and then again to transform it, to create something new from it. But I love that you're listening to those Beethoven concertos. That's so wonderful. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Do you guys mind if I hop in real quick with a question?
Of course. I mean, of course we don't mind.
Of course you mind, yes. I just sort of listening to your answer, Vijay, to Kian's question. And I'm going to start my question with a quick caveat that we go back. So I'm going to ask what is not a gotcha question. I'm not trying to ask you a hard question. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on all of this as someone who has spent so much time on Skid Row in one-on-one relationships with folks who don't have housing for whatever reason. And I'm curious how you've been thinking about and sort of reconciling the idea of being isolated from that community, which is so important from you, and how even isolation is kind of a privilege in and of itself, and the ability to access community on Zoom is something that not everybody has. And I'm just curious how you've missed your relationships with folks on Skid Row, and maybe if you can just sort of reflect on kind of that tug of war.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Brian. And yes, we do go back a ways. And, I remember you sitting in the basement conference room of the Department of Mental Health in Skid Row when we were playing some of our first events there. And I remember those events so clearly because there was not even, 3 feet of space between the performers and the audience. And I think Mitch Newman was in the room then we were playing Beethoven Opus 18 number 4 or something like that. And it was this sense of, even from that time, we got to, as Maya said so beautifully in your introduction, we went from that event right back to Disney Hall. We went from that event right to, talking to a donor or a funder in a beautiful building on the West Side, and the interesting thing from folks in Skid Row was never, the message we got from the community was not that you should feel sorry for us or you should apologize for your lives, but that you should continue to be in relationship with us and you should continue to come back. That the truth is that if you're going to hold yourself accountable to the relationship, then you have to hold up your end of the bargain by being the artist that you are, right? And I take that as a very serious challenge to step into self-manifestation, right? And we work very closely with communities of people who are in recovery and in reentry. And I think several members of my team and my family at Street Symphony are on this call. And one of my, closest mentors and friends is Ben Shirley, who is a composer and someone who reminds me that, part of the work that we get to do is to cultivate our own artistic voices, right? And to be able to offer that lens and that conduit back to an audience so that, as Audrey said, being a listener gives someone a sense of agency, right? Being a listener in that context is transformative. So now to answer the other part of your question of how has it been to be disconnected, the truth is, even throughout this whole time of the pandemic, we've stayed very closely in touch with our colleagues and partners in Skid Row, and actually created an association of Skid Row arts agencies. So all the Skid Row arts providers created an association of nonprofits that have all worked together to get mobile Wi-Fi hotspots in the Skid Row parks, to work with clinicians. And, there's many layers of Skid Row. There's the Skid Row that is the street level homelessness. There's the institutional homelessness. There is people in reentry and recovery who just want to get clean, get paroled, and go back home. So there's a different approach to every single community. And, now staying in touch through our art has been, having a Zoom call with, sometimes an audience of 1 or an audience of 2. And there are folks who are calling in from their phones, in a Skid Row shelter or clinic. And it's like, you know what? That's the event. That's the Zoom room. That's the room that we're cultivating this kind of connection in. And that intimate connection is as valid to us as a connection where we're playing for 500 people or 50 people.
A couple people, Vijay, had questions about your tattoos.
Do
you mind telling us what they say, what they mean?
Sure, certainly. So my tattoos are actually 2 lines of what's essentially called a sloka, kind of like a verse in Sanskrit. And so you read them. It starts here and then it continues here. And these are the opening words of a prayer that precede a text called the Isha Upanishad. The Upanishads are some of the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism. And the Isha Upanishad is actually rather a short one, but it talks about, things like the nature of creation and the cosmos. This is a meditation on wholeness, actually. And wholeness, the word for wholeness in Sanskrit is the word purnam or purnat. And purnam can also mean perfect, fulfilled, complete, infinite, undividable. And so the mantra is basically, if you take this away from that, wholeness still remains. So even if you think you've taken something away from something else, the whole still exists. And so you have always been whole. You have always been complete. You have always been okay. That sort of is the idea.
Am I hopefully not misremembering that these are the first lines of Rina's oratorio?
So that's actually a different tattoo. I have a couple of tattoos.
Okay.
It's going to be upside down on Zoom, but this bit of text here is actually set in Rina's oratorio, This Love Between Us, completely. I mean, she said it in her music and I said it in my body, unprompted and unbeknownst to each other. That was not part of the thing, but it's actually in the 5th movement of her oratorio, which is the movement on Hinduism. And is that what moves within you also moves within me. The same spirit that is in you is in me. Yeah, I'm going to totally tear up. Okay, let's go.
Okay, Mike Mancias, you can unmute yourself. Your question.
Hey, Vijay, my question was about performing in Zoom rooms. And as a performer, how do you know if your performance is connecting with your audience? Do you have any tells or any ways that you sort of create more intimacy with your audience?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And so nice to see you and to hear your voice. I have to say, again, this idea of being met with intention on both sides, that feels really, really beautiful. And I have to say, I mean, for me as a performer, this has been one of the most beautifully curated Zoom rooms that I've been part of. And of course, it's because I know and love, Maya and Kevin and so many people who are in this room. But we had a prep call about how this was going to go, right? You have an idea of what the Celestina magic is. Jason, I'm so happy that you just wrote in, because Jason has been so kind to engage me on my social media madness nearly every day. And I feel welcomed by his encouragement and his comments. And, so I feel like there's much more feedback when I feel like I'm part of a community. right? I've been on the other side of this room as well. I've been a participant in this space. So, this is kind of an unfairly wonderful place to be. But also, I work a lot as a speaker. And sometimes I'm just, I'm pre-recording my stuff into just staring at the green dot. And that can really be an empty space. And so to know that there's someone on the other side of the screen is really helpful. So part of it is, again, is this idea of intentionality on both sides. But yeah, of course, it's awkward to be playing into a space where you don't know how it's being received. On the other hand, I will say I have found this a kind of strange liberation, because for me as a performer, I've always felt like I have to work to project my sound, to play loudly in a space. That during this time has completely gone out the window, right? I'm playing for this, right? And so the way that I play, my technique, the way that I'm thinking about sound, I think has become so much more nuanced because I'm playing with, a much more subtle ear, and kind of playing for the microphone as opposed to playing for all of you in a hall. And that's going to be the next level of consternation when we come back to things in real life is, can we actually hear each other again?
Jason, since you're here, you want to ask Vijay your question?
Yeah, so thanks. And I've been looking forward to this event because I really do love your Instagram content. And so, my day job is I'm an English professor. And so from my perspective, I follow you for music, certainly, but the words are so good. And I just think that all of us tonight have seen that the words are so good, and you speak so well and have clearly just read a lot. And so I'm curious, and I put the question in the chat of just what are you reading now? But I'm also be curious to know about what are texts that have just really deeply shaped you as a thinker and a human, right? What sort of helped, just resonated with you? And what are you looking at now that speaks to you in that way?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for the question, Jason. And of course, this could be a whole nother, I don't know if we could call the whole conversation a happy hour, because I'm not sure everyone would be happy, but it would be really nerdy and lovely for me. I'm currently—
I would be happy.
I'm currently reading a book called Reinventing Bach by Paul Elie. It's an incredible, incredible book that is about, Bach's own life as an inventor of musical forms and of instruments and of, the way he reinvented himself, but then also how Bach's music has always been reinvented as technology has progressed, right? So Albert Schweitzer recording, the Toccata and Fugue, and then Glenn Gould and Yo-Yo Ma, the iPod coming out with Yo-Yo Ma playing Bach, and what's next? How does the music of Bach sort of reinvent itself as we reinvent ourselves? So I'm currently reading that. In terms of texts that have really, changed me, oh gosh, where to start? I just recently finished reading Milan Kundera, Unbearable Lightness of Being, which, talk about a book, where a Beethoven string quartet is front and center, as a character in the book. That is so intensely beautiful to me. I love reading poetry. I also love reading the work of Indian authors, Jhumpa Lahiri, Arundhati Roy. I just finished reading a couple of months ago Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar, which I could not recommend more. It's just absolutely stunning. I go back and forth between reading novels and reading historical texts, and I've got a pile of way too many books that I'm reading through all the time.
I could rotate my computer and show you the pile, Yeah,
I'll spare you from doing the same.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Rowley, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Is Rowley here? Oh, there you are.
Oh, Rowley,
I think you're gonna have to unplug your headphones. I think.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, thanks. This has been terrific. It's wonderful to see you because I don't go to Skid Row enough, so I don't see you enough. But my question was, when you first started at Skid Row, what were the surprises? And then now that you've been there for so long, what have been the surprises?
That's a beautiful question, Raleigh. And I so appreciate you asking it, because I think very early on, the surprise was this audience was completely unwilling to participate in a concert series. They were completely uninterested. And what I mean by that is this was not going to be an event where we just were able to conveniently come in, perform, and leave. Right? We had people in our audience who were so emotionally intuitive, intelligent, who were connected to the music, who were able to give voice to their own experience in the music in a way that I had never experienced in school or in a concert hall. And this was a complete shock, right, of seeing the ways in which, you know, not only we were confronted with the humanity, you know, the rawness of the humanity in Skid Row, but also the ways in which this audience drew us, demanded our own humanity and our own authenticity from ourselves, from us ourselves. That was not just a surprise, it was a moral framework, right? It became a kind of spiritual challenge, right? The other surprise was sort of the slow undoing of anything related to a kind of redemption story, that we as musicians were there to redeem or help or heal people living in Skid Row. It's a very easy kind of noblesse oblige narrative that often accompanies community engagement work or outreach work. Right. You know, but the truth is that, again, relationships are transformative, right? When we actually build relationships with people, we have to be seen and be willing to be seen, see and be willing to be seen, listen and be willing to be heard in radically different ways. And so those continue to be the surprises. So I think for me, and I speak for my staff and family at Street Symphony, that we go to Skid Row kind of out of this sort of selfish pilgrimage. You know, Skid Row is a geographic location in LA. And as my colleague Mitch is saying, you know, we learn so much from the audiences in Skid Row. You know, Skid Row is a geographical place, but Skid Row is also a spiritual place, right? There are alleys and broken pathways and byways within ourselves. We have to pay attention to both. Thank you, Rob.
Vijay, you know, I was just thinking about, oh, Yoshi, did you have a question? I see you.
No, I was sat here, so I'm just chilling out here.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Cool. I was thinking about our conversation and how I think everyone would appreciate hearing the story of how you kind of reclaimed your narrative in social media. You know, how you had that experience being on the front page of
yeah.
Oh, you can tell it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing that up, Kevin. Because, you know, part of my, you talked about how often social media is not wholesome, and Dasi was speaking so beautifully about this idea that, you know, we can kind of project this fake life, you know, and portray this fake life, the curated life. So I had an Instagram account, you know, several years ago. I was on tour with the LA Phil. There was, you know, I couldn't sleep because we were jet lagged. We were in Hong Kong, and I looked out, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I took a photo out of my hotel room, and it was like Kowloon Bay, and it was cloudy, and this barge was coming through the water. It was a decent photo. I love taking photos. I just took it with my cell phone, posted it on Instagram. And the next day I had like 25,000 followers on Instagram because Instagram picked up the image and put it on their front page. And they said, you know, here's here's our featured person, right? And it was early in the days of Instagram. And I had no idea. I mean, people take courses on how to engage audiences on social media, right? The ways in which, you know, there were certain times where it's like, okay, I'm going to play the C major fugue. This is, you know, 14 minutes of counterpoint. So that means it's 2 straight weeks of me playing this fugue. I lost like 400 followers or something. Or, you know, I also didn't have Audrey helping me with hashtags, you know, but now we figured out like what's the right time of day to post and what's the right content. So, you know, all this stuff of honing your own approach and being honed by the audience in a way. And so what I actually did is I got so fed up with that old account that I just shut it down. And I started over again. I wiped the slate clean. And in 2020, I just started a new account. And yeah, I started over with this project. And so now, you know, I kind of submit myself to, you know, challenging myself with difficult reps. So after I finished the Bach, I've always been daunted by the Bartok solo violin sonata. So I was like, okay, you know, not even a minute, 30 seconds a day. I'm going to do, because reels happen, right? So Instagram reels are just 30 seconds. So I was like, okay, 30 seconds of
that
Bartok.
piece, man, that piece. Yeah.
Not even. Hashtag not even.
Right. Right. I love that.
That's right, Jason, filing for Instagram bankruptcy. That's great.
Well, so what made you choose Instagram over? I mean, is that I don't know. You know, I have to be honest. I'm you know, not that involved with Celestina's social media. But is that your main social media platform that you use?
I chose Instagram mainly because it felt like a way of engaging through the sort of visual content as opposed to through written content, right? And so the first thing people see is either the image or the video. Yeah. And so as you're scrolling through, you're caught by the image, and then you're invited to kind of read through. But of course, now it's a much more sophisticated platform because you've got folks who are, you know, reading long bits of text. So sometimes I'll find like my favorite Rilke poem and I'll put it down there. You know, I've recently been posting from Sonnets of Orpheus. And like, for example, I think queued up for tomorrow or something this week is like the moment in the Bach Chaconne where it goes from the exultant major into the minor. And I think either I did this or I didn't. I'm sorry, Audrey, if I didn't do it, but it's a good idea. So we should do it. That I then took one of the sonnets to Orpheus from Rilke when he turns around. And so that idea of Orpheus turning around and Bach turning around in the key at the same time. I don't know if my audience is hearing that, but that's my intention. That feels really beautiful to me. And so I just wanted to put that out there as an artistic thing. So it's just, you know, 30 seconds of music, but it's the artistic thing. So are we doing that, Audrey? I really hope we're doing that because that's a good idea.
Okay, we have time for one last question from Sarah. Sarah, please feel free to unmute yourself. Let's see if I can see what it was. Oh, well, okay, I'll ask her a question. She wanted to know if you actually have experience playing sarangi.
So actually, I don't. I've never played an Indian classical instrument myself. And part of the challenge, I mean, sarangi is a very difficult instrument to play because essentially you're not actually putting your fingers on the string. You're putting your fingers underneath the string, right? And you're playing with your cuticle, which is horrifyingly painful.
That's terrible.
And even instruments like the sitar, you know, if anyone has seen a sitar, the way that you're bending the strings, the calluses are much deeper. So if I were to play a sitar, I think it would mess up my calluses from my violin playing. But, you know, of course, every Indian classical musician, the benchmark is the voice. Right. And so to sing everything, in fact, I would say for any of us, all of our Bach movements, you know, can be sung to understand what the phrasing could be. Anything.
Well, the fugues would be a little bit tough. But...
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, can you imagine, you know, playing Schubert Quartet, you know, or Schubert Quintet, the two cello quintet, and every line can be sung. Yeah. And that's what my teachers did. That's what my colleagues did. So this idea of can I do the same thing with Indian classical music? So yeah.
You know, one last question for me. You know, I'm noticing that your left hand technique of, you know, how you're saying it to make it gluey, and you know, you're getting the I don't know if glissando is the right word, right, for what you do for Indian music, right? But how are you getting around without stuttering on the strings? I mean, are you putting any like oil on your fingers or anything like that?
Actually, no. I'm trying to play with much lighter fingers. So,
got it.
So something like, you know, out of Rina's When the Violin Line. So it's kind of like, you know, Rina told me at some point she listened a lot to the beautiful violinist Kala Ramnath.
Yeah.
And now the recordings of Kala on YouTube, you can actually slow them down
Right.
to like 25, percent speed, and you can watch her finger ticking. It's not always, the word for glissando, the space between the notes is meaned. Not all of the means are just one finger. She'll replace fingers. She'll, change things along the way. So kind of, it was like almost inventing a new technique.
Yeah.
And a new way of understanding that.
Would you say that like adjusting, sorry, this is totally nerdy for, for violinists, but like, would you say that adjusting the tension in the violin and all of that too helps with getting it to speak without putting too much pressure on?
That's an interesting question. Sometimes yes and no. I think actually it just suited this particular instrument better. It also suited the fact that I wasn't playing for like the concert hall projection.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring more color, more warmth into the sound. So yeah, I mean, and now it's a question. I'm starting to go back to the world and starting to play chamber music again. And, maybe I'll play really softly for a change. My colleagues will love that very much, I'm sure.
Vijay, this has been so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Totally a joy.
Generosity of spirit and your intelligence and everything. It's just been a total joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the Celestina community for being who you are and for being such a amazing, warm group of people. I know that it means so much to us as musicians to be met on the other side with the kind of mirror that we crave, and not just in colleagues like Mai and Kevin and Yoshi and Meredith and everyone who's part of the Celestina family, but to all of you who are in the community. So thank you for supporting, become members, give. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Vijay. And thank you, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks again.